Death at a Halloween Horror Park. Written and performed by Tony Capobianco. Her heart racing, Bridget ran through the slasher scare house, screaming, "Help me! Help me! For the love of God, somebody help me! He's going to kill me!" Bridget was a young scare actor playing the role of the scantily clad, bloody victim. This particular scare house heavily used black lights and strobe lights. Animatronic supernatural killers wielding sharp weapons were strategically placed throughout the maze to optimize the screams. Various scare actors dressed as sadistic slashers jumped out of secret passages. The patrons of the slasher house smiled and laughed as the pretty 19-year-old girl frantically yelled for help. A few people even said, "Wow, she's really good. She could be the next Scream Queen in a horror movie." A large man dressed as a demonic clown manhandled Bridget and threw her into the room that was decorated with severed body parts and bloody corpses. She crashed to the floor. The deranged maniac clown methodically walked toward her as she stumbled back up to her feet. The young girl looked like she was genuinely terrified. The strobe light caused her panicked brown eyes to resemble a deer caught in headlights. With a long knife in his left hand, the hideous clown swung the blade and slit her throat. Blood sprayed onto an animatronic undead killer. The crowd in the scare maze erupted in applause. One guest said, "Dang, that stuff was tight. It looks so authentic. That gets 5 stars. This is the best scare park that I've ever been to." Unbeknownst to the folks in attendance, it looked real because it was real. They had just witnessed a real murder. The young lady that worked at the scare park had run up to them and pleaded for their help, and they all just laughed at her. When they would finally learn the truth of that night, that bloody scene and their inaction would haunt them for years to come. The man wearing an inhuman clown mask had left Bridget's dead body in the splatter room. Hours passed as everyone assumed that the real murder victim was nothing but one prop among many. The people can't be blamed for their inaction. Had you been in their place, you very likely would have acted just as they did. This haunted scare park isn't like some of the popular scare attractions that you may have visited. This was Netherworld Gate. One thing that set Netherworld Gate apart from other Halloween scare parks is its unprecedented attention to detail. The theming of each scare house and of all its outdoor attractions was legendary. Once you walked into the park, it wasn't so much that you felt like you had walked onto a movie set, but that you had walked into other real worlds. The bloodthirsty killer, well aware of these facts, chose Netherworld Gate to be the location of his murder spree. Though he had killed Bridget, his lust for blood hadn't yet been quenched. He hunted for his next victim, and when he found her, he stalked her. Being a Friday night, the Scream Park was bustling with large crowds. Among the crowd were 2 beautiful young girls named Jossie and Erica. The 2 best friends loved scare parks, Halloween, and all things horror. Erica had dressed up as a vampire hunter, and Jossie had dressed up as a zombie princess. They had been looking forward to this night since July. Now that the night had arrived, they were absolutely giddy. The first scare house that they visited was Dracula's Castle. The classic monsters were their favorites, and Dracula's Castle had a reputation for being one of the best scare houses in the world. Fog billowed out from the gate to the castle as they walked through it. Through the gate, a Gothic courtyard awaited them. A horse and black carriage was parked by the grand door of the castle. The horse was black with red eyes, and the enclosed carriage had a coffin within it. Large statues of hooded noblemen carried torches which lit the courtyard. Inside Dracula's castle, a red and gold rug covered the floor. The entrance room was large. The sound of a baby crying in another room could be heard. A realistic animatronic Dracula greeted them as they left the gathering room and entered the hallway. A ghoulish figure played the organ as the girls walked down the hall. Skeletons with fangs lined the walls. Candles and blacklights lit the way. The girls really felt like they had entered Dracula's castle. It was almost perfect. Entering into a room with coffins, they noticed that some of the coffins were open but empty. A demonic-looking clown sat up in a coffin and leered at them. The brides of Dracula stood around the room. The girls were unsure which, if any of the female vampires were scare actors. The details on the props made it nearly impossible to tell the difference. In fact, the details were so good that to call them props seemed like a disservice. These were genuine works of art. One of the vampire brides, wearing a white dress, faced the corner of the room. Just as Erica expected the figure in the corner to turn around, she heard a hiss as a white hand appeared before her face. It was one of the motionless vampire brides. She wasn't an inanimate figure. She was real, and her bloody vampire fangs were only inches from her face. Erica had screamed and jumped 3 feet back. Erica ran her left hand through her long black hair and said, "Dracula's castle was even better than I imagined. The scare actors got me good several times. My only complaint was that weird dude in a monstrous clown mask. I mean, what was up with that? Every detail in that castle was perfect, and the theming was extraordinary. Why was there a clown there? He didn't fit in with the other scare actors or the theming." Jossie's blue eyes grew wide as she replied, "Oh my god, right? That didn't make any sense. The guy was creepy, and the mask was actually awesome, but it didn't fit in there. Maybe he saw you earlier, and he just had to get a closer look at how stunning you are." Erica rolled her eyes and said, "Jossie, just stop. Maybe he was stalking you. He probably prefers blondes." The two girls laughed and continued walking. Next up was the Demented Clown Zone. It was an outdoor carnival that contained a merry-go-round, booths, and a big top tent. This outdoor haunt was so large that the girls almost forgot that they weren't at the state fair. Hordes of maniac clowns popped up here and there. Some of the clowns wore makeup, but it was the clowns who wore masks that were the most deeply unsettling. The masks were of the quality seen in movies. The girls looked at the merry-go-round, and they stopped dead in their tracks. It was the same demonic clown that they had seen rising from a coffin in Dracula's castle. He was standing on the merry-go-round, staring at them. Erica put her hand on Jossie's shoulder and said, "I think he really likes you." Jossie raised her eyebrows and said, "What's not to like?" The girls laughed and walked towards the big top tent. As Jossie looked over her shoulder, she noticed that the demented clown was walking toward them. He was carrying a large knife. Jossie pinched Erica's arm, pointed toward the clown that was following them, and said, "Hey, Erica, you know what? I'm not really in the mood for a carnival after all. Why don't we go check out the Hell's Gate Scarehouse instead?" Erica nodded her head and said, "Yeah, evil clowns are so 5 years ago anyway." Erica and Jossie arrived at a huge cave. A red glowing light illuminated the fog which billowed out from the cave's entrance. Engraved in the rock on top of the entrance were the words, "Abandon all hope, ye who enter here." They walked through Hell's Mouth and entered. Moaning filled the cave. The echoes of the terrible moans and screams added to the realism. Ghastly ghouls and skeletons were hidden around the turns. Deeper into the cave, they saw gruesome depictions of torture. There were bodies that were being skinned alive, people in cages dangling above fire, demons gnawing on people, and people being boiled in cauldrons. A siren blared as they approached the devil himself. The devil was red-skinned with cloven-hoofed feet, a whip-like tail, yellow eyes, and 2 large horns on his head. His mouth was large and filled with sharp teeth. As they approached him, he said, "I have been expecting you. A special place has been prepared just for you. Your eternal suffering is only just beginning. I have such wonderful pain to show you. Go ahead, see your forever home." After hearing those terrible words, the girls came to a room. It was completely dark. A horrific shriek made them jump. Red lights then turned on and revealed that they were trapped. There was no exit to the room. Several demons, along with damned human souls, accompanied them in the enclosed room. Voices repeatedly whispered, "Welcome to your forever home." Several minutes later, the wall opened and the path continued. While the path was narrow, there were large caverns on either side. Grotesque beasts inhabited the caverns. Erica and Jossie were holding each other's hands to give each other reassurance. This scare house was quite possibly the scariest of all. Erica squeezed Jossie's hand. Jossie looked at Erica and noticed that her jaw had dropped as her eyes seemed to have doubled in size. The demonic clown was running through the fog and lunged at Erica with his big knife. He plunged it deep into her stomach and lifted her up off of the ground as gravity drove the knife deeper. The demented killer clown kept Erica impaled on his knife for several seconds, and as he did so, he tilted his head. It was as if he was trying to get the best view of his evil work. Jossie screamed and ran out of the cave. She ran up to people and yelled, "He killed my best friend! A killer clown killed Erica!" Once again, everyone thought that it was all part of the show. Jossie ran, and as she looked over her shoulder, she saw that the psycho killer clown was racing after her. The maniac in the mask chased her right into another outside scare area. It was the haunted crypt. This cemetery resembled the classic New Orleans-style cemeteries. Fog covered the ground just as it did in the classic monster movies. Unfortunately for Jossie, this wasn't a movie. This was real. Jossie hid inside one of the crypts. The killer in the clown mask slowed down, but walked on past her hiding place. She was breathing heavily as her body trembled. The clown suddenly lurched through the door of the crypt. He lunged at Jossie, but Jossie dove out of the way. She quickly sprung to her feet and ran out of the crypt. As she ran, an animatronic ghost dropped right in front of her. She must have set off the motion sensor. There's no way that the killer clown hadn't heard the sound. A crypt to the side caught Jossie's attention as she ran past the ghost. The crypt had an open coffin. She pulled herself up and through the window. She then got into the coffin, pulled down the lid, and closed herself in. She breathed quietly and even used her hand to cover her mouth. The maniac in the demonic-looking clown mask almost walked by the crypt where Jossie was hiding, but something caught his eye. White and red makeup was smeared on the window to the crypt. Jossie had been dressed up as a zombie princess, and all of the sweat and running must have caused the makeup to run. The killer kicked in the door to the crypt. Breathing heavily through his mask, he slowly walked around the room. He checked to see if she had put on the clothes of the Grim Reaper that was standing in the back corner. He then checked to see if she was hiding behind a black curtain. Next, he methodically walked towards the coffin, and he violently yanked open the lid and said, "Trick or treat." Raising his left hand high toward the ceiling, Jossie screamed. Then he ferociously drove his big knife into Jossie's chest. Her blood splattered across the demonic clown mask. Satisfied with himself, he pulled out his knife, licked it, and gazed at the carnage that he had inflicted. A clanking sound was heard as his knife dropped to the floor of the crypt. The clown breathed heavily and staggered backwards against the wall. The massive wound made by the clown's knife closed up before his eyes. Jossie sat up with her arms folded across her chest, flashed a pair of pointy fangs, and said, "My turn." Leaping out from the coffin, Jossie jumped on top of him and bit into his throat. She sucked up his blood like a milkshake through a straw. Excuse me, were you not going to share with your little old best friend?" said Erica as she stood in the doorway with her fangs extended. Pausing from feeding for a moment, Jossie ran her right hand back through her long, silky blonde hair and said, "Tonight was fun! We should totally do this again. Drinks on me!" With a wickedly fun smile on her face, Erica proceeded towards the man who had tried to kill her earlier that night. While Jossie fed from the killer clown's neck, Erica sank her teeth into the artery that pulsated on his inner elbow. The beautiful vampire girls drank his blood until he ran dry. House of Ghosts. Cursed Dragon Rings. Written and performed by Tony Capobianco. A house is supposed to be a safe place that shelters you from the evils of the outside world. It's supposed to be a warm home. Your house is supposed to be a dream come true and a place that gives birth to hope. However, not all houses provide these things. Some houses are where evil dwells. There are houses that crush hope and birth fear and despair. I know this to be true, because my dream home became a living nightmare that nearly shattered my soul. My name is Gabriel Burton. My lovely wife Linda and I moved from Westchester County in New York to Orange County. We moved with our kids to an old but beautiful and spacious house in the Hudson Valley. When our eldest boy, Stephen, became 13 years old, we knew it was time to buy a house. The apartment, which had served us well for the last decade, had become too cramped and cluttered for the four of us. Having a big yard for our two boys to play in was a dream that Linda and I aspired to make a reality. Looking at that big colonial-style house for the first time was a moment that we would never forget. It had been love at first sight. The charming house came with 3 acres of land. That was more than enough property for our boys, Stephen and Billy, to have fun on. The boys had been so excited. They wanted to move in at once. My wife Linda was also very excited. The 2-floor house had 5 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms. One bathroom would be for Linda and I, and the other would be for the kids. While that may not seem exciting, it was for us, because the 4 of us had all shared one bathroom in our old apartment. Our first days in our very first house seemed like paradise. Our lifelong dream appeared to have finally come true. The 4 of us had been brimming with happiness. Things, however, are not always as they seem. the outward facade was quickly ripped asunder. The initial signs of trouble were overlooked or dismissed. Had you been in my place, you may have dismissed the little things too. After all, events started out small, and small things are easy to put aside. Shortly after moving into the house, objects would go missing or they'd end up in weird places. For instance, one time we couldn't find the TV remote. We looked high and low for it, but it was nowhere to be found. Then, a week later, I found the remote on top of the kitchen cabinets. Mind you, I needed a stepladder to reach the top of the kitchen cabinets, and I'm 6 feet tall. There was simply no way that my kids were going to reach it, not even if they climbed on top of a chair. The remote wasn't the only time that objects turned up in places that they shouldn't have. One time, Stephen had found some spices from the pantry in the top shelf of the closet in his bedroom. He was 13 years old at the time, so it's not like he was interested in the fine art of cooking. Yet, the spices had ended up in his closet. It was very peculiar. As strange as those instances were, my gorgeous wife had a far stranger experience. After a long day gardening, Linda had taken a relaxing shower. After working hard and sweating in the sweltering hot summer sun, there isn't anything as refreshing as a nice shower. After Linda had gotten out of the shower, she texted me to bring her a bra and slippers. She was certain that she had put her blue bra and her red house slippers in the bathroom. I had brought her a white bra and gray slippers because I had been unable to find the ones that she wanted. Later that evening, she found both her blue bra and her red house slippers in the most bizarre place. They were in the kitchen freezer. Odd as these instances were, we had been able to dismiss them as having been either a trick of the mind, a family prank, or a product of absent-mindedness. The misplaced items weren't the only unusual thing to occur. Alone in the house, I had heard the sound of footsteps coming from upstairs. It sounded like someone had been walking up on the second floor. After receiving no answer when I called out to see if Linda or the boys had somehow gotten upstairs without my knowing it, I went up to check it out. There was no one up there. On a number of occasions, Linda and the kids told me that they had heard the sound of someone walking upstairs when there wasn't anyone up there at all. Then there were the flushing toilets. Right after we moved in, we heard both the upstairs toilet and the downstairs toilet flush all by themselves. Although I wasn't a plumber by trade, I knew that toilets aren't supposed to flush themselves. The toilets seemed to flush regularly while we ate dinner together and after we had all gone to bed. Even after we had spent $1,000 on a plumber and a new toilet, the phantom flushing of the toilets continued. A bone-chilling cold would unexpectedly be felt at times within the house. Even on 95-degree days in August, I would suddenly feel a deep chill. After checking the thermostat, everything seemed to be normal. The temperature read 75 degrees. Those small peculiarities had soon turned into big fears. Our youngest son, Billy, began waking us up late at night. It seemed as though the awful sound of Billy's screams filled the house nearly every night between 12 a.m. and 4 a.m. He told us that there was a bad man in his room. Night after night, I checked the security alarm and walked around the house to make sure that there was no intruder. Time and time again, there was no sign of trouble. Yet Billy kept pleading with us. He wanted us to help him. He insisted that a shadowy figure with a top hat visited his room every night. Linda and I chalked it up to nightmares. We believed that he was simply having night terrors. Billy was 10 years old at the time, and bad nightmares are not uncommon at that age. October arrived and we decorated the house for Halloween. Our family always looked forward to Halloween. We put up cute decorations. Linda and Billy loved the pumpkin, cat, ghost, and skeleton paper decorations that you tack into the walls. Stephen and I were more partial towards the scarier, adult kinds of Halloween props and animatronics, but we never had the space for them in the old apartment. Eager to finally be able to put up a life-sized Halloween prop, we bought one. We bought a 6-foot-tall undead butler. It had green skin. He wore a black suit with a black top hat. When activated by noise or motion, he would say, "Welcome. The Master has been expecting you. He will see you shortly." Stephen and I thought that the undead butler was totally awesome. The night that we put the undead butler up near the front door, we all heard him begin to talk as though he had been activated. The problem, however, was that we were all in bed. I got out of bed and unplugged him from the electrical outlet. This was the kind of prop that didn't run on batteries. It needed to be plugged into a wall outlet. I had gone back to bed. About 5 minutes later, my wife and I heard the heavy breathing sound that the undead butler prop makes, followed by, "The Master has been expecting you. He will see you shortly." The hair on the back of my neck rose as a chill ran down my spine. My wife and I looked at each other as she said, "I thought that you unplugged that thing." "I did unplug it," I replied as I jumped out of bed to see what was going on. Sure enough, the undead butler was unplugged. It wasn't possible for it to make a sound or turn on, and yet it had done exactly that. Linda and I heard it. We couldn't explain what we had just witnessed. That October had marked 5 months since we had moved into that house. It was also the month that saw a terrible escalation in frightful, ghostly activity. One evening, Stephen had been reading an e-book on his tablet in his room when he saw an old woman watching him from the rocking chair. She smirked right at him and then disappeared. A few nights later, Linda was brushing her teeth. After she rinsed her mouth and spit the water down into the sink, she raised her head and looked in the mirror. She saw the withered, pale face of a man staring back at her. She was so frightened that her body trembled and her voice was uneven an hour after it had happened. The unplugged animatronic undead butler continued to turn on and speak on a daily basis. Every day, the haunting footsteps, the phantom toilet flushes, and knocking on the walls were heard. There was no denying that something paranormal was going on. Linda, Stephen, little Billy and I were afraid. None of us ever wanted to be alone in that house. Something as simple as taking a shower had become an ominous quest. I felt like someone or something was always watching me. We never felt alone. We reached the point where we no longer felt safe. On October 13th, I had been outside watching little Billy play on the front steps. It was a partly cloudy and typically chilly fall day. Billy had been playing with his superhero toys. I smiled as I watched my son having a genuine moment of happiness and fun. That's when it happened. Out of nowhere, I saw Billy fly up off of the front steps. It looked as though an incredibly powerful man had thrown him 10 yards into the air and into the old oak tree in the front yard. There was no one there. An invisible force had tossed him as if he was one of the toys that he had been playing with. The smile on my face vanished. My stomach sank like a boulder falling into a lake. My eyes grew wide as I felt an electric current run through me. I sprinted towards Billy to check on him. He had a bloody nose and a cut on his chin. After he stopped crying, it turned out that he didn't appear to have any broken bones. There were no indications of a concussion. Thankfully, he was all right. What happened to Billy had sent our anxiety through the roof. We were terrified. It had become clear that these evil spirits were capable of causing physical harm. Linda and I were very concerned for our boys. How could we keep our baby safe when we didn't even understand what was happening? How can you fight a ghost? I was also quite concerned for Linda's well-being. The time had come to call on some help. Linda and I scoured the internet to find someone that could assist us, or at least give us answers. After hours of searching, we found a local paranormal research group. They went by the name Hudson Valley Paranormal Troopers. We emailed them and explained the dire situation. They got back to us within an hour. They explained that because we had kids, they would get out here as soon as possible. 2 days later, Brad, the head of the Hudson Valley Paranormal Troopers, arrived. He had long brown hair parted down the middle. He also wore a mustache with a patch of hair under his bottom lip. He was about 5'10" tall. His t-shirt had Hudson Valley Paranormal Troopers written on it with a ghost for a logo. Brad explained that he had come by himself so that he could get the ball rolling. He told us what the paranormal troopers do and what we could expect from the process. Basically, they were going to set up sensitive equipment that might be able to record anything paranormal. Their methods were similar to what is seen on various ghost hunting shows on TV. After Brad interviewed us, he told us that he'd be back the next day with 2 other team members. Brad suggested that Linda, the kids, and I stay in a hotel or over a friend's house the day of the investigation. They had planned to stay in the house for 24 hours. We complied with the suggestion. We were happy to be spending a night outside of that nightmare house. Brad called me on my mobile phone the morning after the investigation concluded. He sounded stressed as he said, "Good morning, Gabriel. This is Brad from Hudson Valley Paranormal Troopers. The good news is that you guys aren't crazy. The bad news is that there is definitely something in your house, and it isn't friendly. We believe that your house is haunted by a malevolent entity or entities." I responded, "Thanks for the confirmation. We already knew that there was something wicked there. What can you do about it? What time do you want us to come back today?" "Well, Gabriel, this isn't something that we normally say, but frankly, we don't think you should come back here today. If you could stay in the hotel for a bit longer or stay with a relative, that would be wise," answered Brad in a serious tone. "Look, Brad, that's our house. We have been living there since June. Are a few more nights really going to make a difference? What if we send the kids to stay with my brother for a few days?" I asked with frustration. Brad calmly and with concern answered, "I know this is a lot to deal with. I would definitely make sure that your kids don't go back into that house unless or until it's cleared out. That place is extremely dangerous. Shelley, a team member, was thrown against the bedroom wall in your youngest son's room. She has a massive bruise on her back. Our camera caught the violent act. It also picked up the outline of a tall, shadowy figure dressed in what looked like an old top hat. In fact, the shadow figure resembled the animatronic Halloween prop that you have by the front door. We also recorded what seems to be a disembodied voice humming some old song. That's not all. 3 gold rings, each with the engraved image of a dragon, were discovered. Each had the word malo engraved on it. Malo is Latin for evil. These rings were found in 3 separate areas. The first ring was found in the basement. The second ring was found in the crawl space in your bedroom. The third ring was found in the crawl space in your youngest son's room. In fact, Shelley was attacked shortly after she had taken the ring out of the crawl space in Billy's room. Overwhelmed by all of the information, I responded in a distant voice. "So, the tall shadow man with a top hat was real. The spirit attacked your team member in Billy's room. There are rings that have pictures of dragons and the word evil marked on them. What is going on? What does it mean? What can we do? Brad calmly said, "You aren't alone. We are going to help you the best we can. You and your family really should stay out of this house for a while. We think that those dragon rings has something to do with the paranormal activity in your house. They might be cursed. We'll have to consult someone who is knowledgeable in spiritual warfare, demonology, and the occult. Please try to take a breath and hang in there. Saying some prayers wouldn't hurt either." I'll never forget how despondent I felt after that phone call. The conversation with Brad had left me speechless for several minutes. We were crushed by the realization that what we believed was our dream home was actually a home of nightmares. The hope that we once shared had morphed into dread. The joy that we initially had experienced transformed into deep sorrow. The former peace offered by the house had mutated into an unadulterated fear. Worst of all was the fact that Billy had been hurt in that house. Something unseen could have seriously hurt us. For all we knew, the evil demon could possess the ability to kill one of us. All of those thoughts and feelings nearly shattered my soul. The four of us went and stayed with my brother for a few weeks. I felt a mixture of relief and terrible anxiety. The relief was on account of being out of that cursed haunted house for a while, and knowing that my family was safe for the time being. The anxiety was due to the uncertainty about what was to come. If we couldn't get rid of the evil spirits, then we'd be forced to sell the house. If it came down to selling, how could I, in good conscience, sell that house to some other family? I couldn't put someone else in the terrible situation that we had found ourselves in. Yet, there was no way that we could continue to live there as long as it remained haunted by evil spirits. So it was that my mind was haunted by numerous thoughts and questions. The Hudson Valley paranormal troopers had consulted with a Catholic exorcist. This priest was an expert on demonology and the occult. The exorcist said that the engravings on the rings were of an occult nature. The dragon represented the devil. The rings were cursed. It seemed likely that a previous owner of our house had been a Satan worshipper. The priest suspected that a black mass that included a sacrifice, possibly a human sacrifice, was performed in the house. The dragon rings would have been consecrated to Lucifer during the Black Mass. The priest explained that such a dark ritual would have opened a gate to hell. A Black Mass and a satanic sacrifice performed on the property would have given demons rights to dwell and interact upon the property and anyone that crossed onto it. In his words, those evil deeds caused a demonic infestation of the house. In a demonic infestation, it is not uncommon to come across both demons as well as damned souls of humans. The exorcist further explained that the dragon rings acted as a dark insurance policy. That is to say, because they were consecrated to the devil and hidden in various locations throughout the house, they would ensure that the house remained diabolically infested, even if someone cleansed the house in more ordinary ways. A simple house blessing, or even having a holy mass offered in the house, wouldn't resolve the evil infestation. The cursed dragon rings had to be found, removed, and safely destroyed. The exorcist told us that he suspected that the paranormal troopers had only found half of the cursed dragon rings. Satanists revere the number 6. The significance of the number 6 led the priest to guess that 6 dragon rings had been hidden in the house. He suggested that the Hudson Valley paranormal troopers return to the house as soon as possible to locate the remaining 3 cursed dragon rings. He wanted to destroy the rings and offer a holy mass in the house on All Saints' Day. All Saints' Day is, of course, the day after Halloween. Since All Saints' Day is considered by Catholics to be one of the holiest days of the year, The exorcist was determined to cleanse the house then. That plan didn't leave the paranormal troopers much time to find the cursed dragon rings. Halloween was the next day, and that was the day that we went back to our haunted house in order to locate the cursed items. I went along with them. 9 a.m. was the time that we entered my house. The air in the house seemed to be extraordinarily heavy and oppressive. The presence of something unnatural pervaded the atmosphere. It was like an unseen beast was watching and stalking us. Fear permeated my pores. The undead butler Halloween prop greeted us by breathing heavily and saying, "Welcome. The Master has been expecting you. We will deal with you shortly. You will not survive." Footsteps could be heard walking across the upstairs floor just moments after we had walked into the house. Including myself, there were 4 of us. We split up into 2 pairs of 2 in order to cover more area. After 10 hours of searching, we had only found 1 more cursed ring. Brad had found it buried in the fireplace. Then, all of a sudden, we heard a loud, menacing moan. The bone-chilling moan was followed by the sound of glass shattering. Paul, the paranormal trooper that was paired with Shelley, had been pushed through the upstairs window. He had fallen to the ground and was badly injured. We immediately called 911 for help. That malicious attack ended our search that Halloween night. We obviously were not safe in that house, and the demons there were capable of gravely harming us, and they wanted us dead. If we couldn't find more than 1 dragon ring after 10 hours, then it wasn't likely that we would have any more luck had we stayed longer. No, it was more likely that staying longer would have resulted in death. The positive news was that Paul had some internal injuries and some external cuts, but he eventually healed. The negative news was that we failed to locate all 3 of the remaining dragon rings. We had only discovered 1, and that meant that 2 cursed dragon rings likely remained in that house of ghosts. The exorcist did destroy the 4 cursed dragon rings that we had located, and he did offer a holy mass in our house. Unfortunately, that wasn't enough to banish the evil spirits from the house. As soon as the priest finished offering mass, we heard an evil-sounding humming coming from upstairs. It was as though the evil spirits that dwelt there had been taunting us. The exorcist said that it wasn't safe there, and that it probably wouldn't be safe there unless the remaining 2 rings were found and destroyed. He said that he would contact a spiritually sensitive person in the hope that she might be able to locate the rings. We thanked him for his help, but we were certain that we were leaving that house. It was too dangerous. We would never feel safe there again. So, we put the Hell House on the market. The realtor laughed at us when we told her that the house was haunted and very dangerous. It sold 2 months later. We offered the same warning to the buyer. He mocked us for the warning at the time, but a year later he put the house on the market. As far as I know, the House of Ghosts remains infested with evil, and the cursed dragon rings remain hidden. The FBI and the Secret Portal to Another World. Written and performed by Tony Capobianco. Reports of a witch had caught the eye of the Moon Mist Division. Several witnesses had claimed to have seen a woman dressed like a witch hovering through the woods. Special agents Lydia Marsh and Kono Castabello were sent to Ulster County, New York to investigate. A year had passed since the 2 agents had met following the terrible events of the massacre at the Coffin Falls police station. Since then, Agent Castabello had been studying and training in the ways of the Kaibo. As the two agents arrived to the forest where a witch had allegedly been sighted, they took note of the fog. A strange fog which seemed to glow covered the forest. The agents were well aware of the fact that the appearance of a bizarre fog often coincided with reports of the supernatural. The agents had encountered this ominous fog in places where vampires or some other supernatural being had settled down or nested for an extended period of time. The ethereal fog seemed to have grown denser as Agents Marsh and Castabello entered deeper into the woods. Agent Castabello pointed toward a tree branch and said, "Hey, take a look at this." While attentively observing the peculiar handcrafted objects made of sticks dangling from a tree branch, Agent Marsh said, "Yes, very interesting. This is the work of a witch. She's been very busy. These Fluchwatten are dangling from many of these trees." Fluchwatten are handcrafted objects that have had a curse or a hex placed on them. Witches often shape these objects into pentagrams or various occult symbols. The effect of the Fluchwatten depends on the type of spell cast upon it. Sometimes the witch will use these hexed items for defensive purposes. Other times they are used to attract potential victims to the area. They are commonly used to instill fear. Agent Castabello knelt to the ground as he discovered what appeared to be a crude altar surrounded by various animal bones. As he used a stick to investigate, he said, "We're close. This is definitely a dark altar. It looks like some of these sacrifices were made recently. The witch isn't far." Agent Marsh took off her backpack, opened it up, and took out steel shackles. Engraved symbols covered the shackles. These special symbols gave the shackles the power to bind a witch and prevent her from using magic. The tricky part, however, was getting the shackles on the witch and safely securing her. Cackling was heard in the distance. Agents Kono Castabello and Lydia Marsh stood back to back. The fog made it difficult to see further than 10 yards. A foul wind began to blow. The fog took on a greenish glow. Emerging from the greenish fog, the witch had arrived. The witch was floating in the fog. It was a chilling sight. She didn't appear to be old or ugly. On the contrary, she looked young and beautiful. As the witch began to say a spell, she started to choke. Agent Castabello was extending his right arm toward her as he closed his hand into a fist. He was using a telekinesis skill that he had learned. He was squeezing her throat from a safe distance. Agent Castabello continued to choke her as he used his Kaibo abilities to bring her to the ground. Once brought to the ground, Agent Marsh ran over and bound the witch in the witch-proof shackles. With the witch safely restrained by the shackles, Agent Castabello stopped using the Kaibo choke power. The witch gasped for air. After she had caught her breath, her eyes grew wide and her mouth was agape. She was confused and in complete shock. Looking at Agent Castabello, the witch said, "What is the meaning of this? How do you have the Kaibo choke power? I have heard that the Kaibo have been dead for many centuries." Raising his eyebrows, Agent Castabello answered, "Well, lady, you heard wrong. Didn't anyone ever tell you not to believe everything that you hear? The rumors of the final demise of the Kaibo are greatly exaggerated." The two agents escorted the witch to their car, and they then drove back to Moon Mist headquarters. This top-secret government facility is located in the Hudson Valley. Hidden deep in a forest that was marked as private property, the facility went unnoticed. The appearance of the property was unremarkable. It simply looked like a large forest with a medium-sized cabin located at the center of the property. It certainly didn't look like an FBI office, much less the headquarters of a top-secret division of the Bureau. However, looks can be deceiving. The cabin in the woods even seemed to be quite ordinary on the inside. Everything about the cabin was as you would expect, until you went into the basement and accessed a secret elevator. The elevator was hidden in a secret passage. In order to access the elevator, a retina scan was required. The elevator went down 31 feet below the house. 31 feet below the seemingly ordinary cabin in the woods was the location of Moon Mist headquarters. The underground facility was large and well-staffed. The security was state-of-the-art, and it was heavily fortified. An elite security team recruited from the Special Forces of the United States military regarding the facility. This security team was given the name Mist Force. The reason for the formation of Mist Force and the strange location of Moon Mist is the same. 31 feet below the ground was where a strange, shimmering orange and green light had been discovered. It was a portal to another world. The FBI had learned that vampires, witches, malevolent inhuman spirits, and other dangerous creatures had been entering into our world through this mysterious portal. The creatures had been passing through the portal and climbing up through a tunnel to the surface. After the FBI had confirmed this, the U.S. government quietly built Moon Mist headquarters around it. The secret portal to another world was located at the center of the underground facility. Steel and concrete walls were erected around the portal, and a bulletproof glass enclosure was erected inside of that outer barrier. The fortified glass enclosure was intended to provide a measure of safety for observational purposes. Although monstrous creatures from another world had been able to come and go through the portal and pass between worlds, no man had been able to do the same. The greatest minds hadn't been able to find a way to get a drone through the portal. Moon Mist had to figure out a way to break through the portal. They needed to see what was on the other side. Beating an enemy is heavily reliant upon gathering intelligence. They also figured that if they could learn the secrets of how the portal works, then maybe they'd be able to close it down. It was for these reasons that the FBI sent out agents Kono Castabello and Lydia Marsh to capture and bring back a witch. The witch was brought into the Moon Mist facility and secured in a room by agents Castabello and Marsh. The security of the residents of the Hudson Valley, and possibly of the entire planet, hinged upon what would happen next. The interrogation was about to begin. The enchanted shackles remained on the witch as she walked around in a padded room with a two-way mirror. Agent Marsh entered the interrogation room first. Agent Marsh sat down and said, "I'm Lydia. I can help you. You have a choice. You can answer a few questions, and I can give you access to a portal to take you back to your world, or you can refuse to cooperate and rot in a prison cell." The witch grinned and said, "Why would I trust you?" Lydia answered, "We could have killed you rather than bring you here. We could have made you very uncomfortable on your trip here, but instead we've treated you more humanely than you probably deserved." The witch looked at her shackles and said, "You call these barbaric chains hospitality? You only kept me alive because you want me for something. What's to stop you from killing me after you get the answers that you need? What's to come of me once I'm no longer of use to you?" Lydia smiled and said, "Those are wise and fair questions. Honor and human decency are the reasons that we won't betray an arrangement with you. That is, as long as you honor your side of the deal, then we'll honor our side of the bargain. I understand that witches enjoy making bargains." The witch squinted her eyes and responded, "Yes, we do love a good bargain. I suppose that it wouldn't hurt to hear you out. What kind of answers do you want?" Lydia folded her hands together and asked, "How did you get through the portal? Why won't the portal allow us through it? What can we do to open the portal?" The pretty witch tapped her fingers against the table and said, "Are you crazy? If the rulers of my world learned that I taught you how to cross over between dimensions at will, they'd ensure that I'd receive a fate worse than death." Lydia softly bit her lip and said, "No one has to know that you helped us. We'll keep it a secret. You can have your freedom in the place that you belong." The witch leaned forward and replied, "They will know. They always find things out. They have eyes and ears all over the place. As for my freedom, why do you think that I came here? I wanted to be free from the tyranny of the ruler of my world. I came here and I've harmed no one. I might have offered a few animal sacrifices as part of my religious practice, and I might have seduced a few young men, but I haven't hurt anyone." Lydia raised her eyebrows and said, "That's very interesting. If what you say is true, why did you scare the people that you encountered in the woods? Why did you try to attack my partner and I today?" The witch smirked and answered, "Is it a crime to play a trick on someone? Can a girl have some fun? I didn't hurt anyone, and I didn't intend to kill you or your handsome partner. I was simply trying to have a laugh and scare you away." Lydia got up out of her chair and said, "If you don't want to help us, and if you really don't want to go back home, then I think we're done here." Agent Kono Castabello entered the room, sat down, and said, "Hello, my name's Kono. What's your name?" The witch smiled as her eyes grew large and answered, "Hi, Kono. My name's Annabelle. You really are charming, even when you aren't Kaibo choking me." Kono briefly brushed his right hand through his hair and replied, "Oh, that. Yes, it was a necessary precaution. People with your abilities can be very dangerous. In fact, we hadn't previously met anyone or anything friendly from your world. I'm sure that you understand." Annabelle twirled her long blonde hair with her left hand and said, "Let me tell you something, dearie. There are a lot of bad beings in my world, but not everyone is evil. Many people, such as myself, are oppressed. Those of us who don't hurt other creatures unnecessarily and don't try to gain power at all costs are treated like pawns to be played with. We are social outcasts. Some of us, who are not evil, have escaped through an interdimensional portal and lived quiet lives here in your world. People like that wouldn't have drawn your attention." Kono inhaled deeply and replied, "There are others like you? Are there a lot of beings from your world who don't like the ruler?" Annabelle answered, "Oh yes, there are many who, like me, desire to be free." Kono leaned toward Annabelle and said, "Why don't you fight back? Why don't you join forces and fight for freedom?" Annabelle sighed as her brown eyes appeared sad and answered, "Because the Dark Emperor is too powerful. He has ruled for thousands of years. The Dark Master has easily crushed every uprising. He doesn't only torture and kill those involved in threatening his power, but he also wipes out the neutral family members along with their entire villages. He is pure, unadulterated evil. I believe that in your world you would call him the devil incarnate." Kono's eyes grew wide as he gently placed his right hand on Annabelle's folded hands. He then said, "That is truly terrible. I'm very sorry to hear that. It sounds like you and I are on the same side. I think that we might be able to work together. Let me get back to you in a little bit. It's been nice to properly meet you, Annabelle. Oh, and I really am sorry for the way our first introduction went down earlier this afternoon. Agent Kono Castabello had gotten out of his chair and left the room to go consult with Director Michael Glover. Standing 6 feet 5 inches tall with a muscular frame, Michael Glover was an imposing figure. The director of the Moon Mist Division was African American. The short, cropped haircut that he wore contributed toward revealing his lively facial expressions. The interview with Annabelle the Witch had yielded productive and unexpected results. Agent Castabello tried to persuade Director Glover to offer Annabelle and her family asylum on Earth in exchange for teaching the agents how to gain passage through the portal. Castabello further argued that Annabelle could be a priceless asset and potential ally. Her knowledge of the alien world on the other side of the portal could offer them the kind of intelligence that they had long desired. More than this, Castabello saw the possibility of forming an alliance with the oppressed and exploited beings in the monster dimension. Director Glover cautiously agreed with Agent Castabello's view. The director was willing to offer Annabelle and her family trans-world asylum, provided that she cooperated with Moon Mist Division. Upon hearing the details of the deal being offered, Annabelle accepted. October 31st, 2022 was the historic day that Moon Mist Division sent a small team through the portal. The team was given 2 objectives to complete. The first objective was reconnaissance. The Moon Mist team was commissioned to stealthily obtain information about the land, its inhabitants, towns, and about the rulers of the realm. The second objective was to locate and bring back Annabelle's mother and sister. The small Moon Mist force was comprised of agents Castabello, Marsh, Stryker, Che, and Annabelle the Witch. Annabelle revealed the mystical words which briefly opened the portal. When the words Yayo, Vukvar, Verelden were spoken, the portal could be crossed. Passage through the interdimensional portal remained possible for 31 seconds after the mystical words were spoken. Agent Lydia Marsh led the way as the Moon Mist team bravely went through the portal. Passing through the portal resulted in feeling butterflies in the stomach and a sensation similar to static electricity throughout the body. It took a mere 3 seconds to pass from one side of the portal to another. Once through the gate to another world, the travelers felt what they dubbed the portal rush. The rush was attributed to the body's release of endorphins. Once through the portal, the Moon Mist team found themselves in a dark cave. Only a faint reddish light emanating from the mouth of the cave kept them from being totally enshrouded by darkness. As they cautiously moved toward the red light, they came to the mouth of the cave. A brilliant waterfall flowed down into a lake. The cave was hidden behind the waterfall. The red light had been caused by a red sun. Filtered by the waterfall, the red rays of the sun entered the cave. Annabelle led the team out of the cave and around the ferocious waterfall as they walked over a rocky ledge. Unlike the blue sky of Earth, the sky here was crimson. The horizon was as a candle dipped in blood. Cotton candy-like clouds floated low on the horizon. The color of these clouds varied from gray to black to orange to green. The skyline was truly remarkable. Agents Castabello, Marsh, Stryker, and Che explained it as a terribly beautiful and ominous sight. The sun, clouds, and sky weren't the only remarkable things. As the Moon Mist team traveled over the rocky ridge, they noticed that they felt lighter and that they could jump higher. Gravity was apparently considerably weaker here. Perhaps this played a role in the size of the living things here in this strange world. Some of the trees and creatures were enormous. The team was amazed by the gargantuan size of some of the trees that they saw. both remarkably wide and tall. These trees made the visitors from Earth feel small. The spectacular display of the foliage was breathtakingly beautiful. Both the hulking trees and the small trees were adorned with leaves colored in various shades of red, yellow, and orange. This display wasn't seasonal. The leaves appeared like this all year round. Much like vampires, the foliage seemed to remain in an eternal living dead state. This world contained an untold number of mysteries. The team on the Council of Annabelle were dressed in gray and black hooded robes. This was the usual attire here, and the team needed to blend in. As the agents headed into a forest, they noted the strange glowing fog. Just as they had routinely encountered on Earth in places where supernatural creatures nested, the fog here glowed with white, orange, and green hues. Yet again, they found that the things of this mysterious world produced a sense of both beauty and terror. Walking through the forest, Annabelle turned to Agent Castabello and said, "Kono, remember what I told you. Do not use your Kaibo powers unless absolutely necessary. If you do have to use them to take out an enemy aggressor, you must kill them and make sure that there are no witnesses. If word got out that the Kaibo are not extinct and that one of them is here in the hallowed Nok Drakun realm, then our plans would be for naught. No creature here can know about us. We have to be stealthy, have a quick look from a safe distance, get my mother and sister, and get out of here. If we fail, if we are discovered, then the Dark Emperor will not allow us to leave, and he will accelerate his plans of the conquest of Earth. Trust me when I tell you that your world is not ready for that." Agent Castabello placed his right hand on Annabelle's shoulder and said, "I understand. If we follow your instructions, then we have a chance to go unnoticed and pull this mission off. We don't want the Dark Emperor to place security guards around the portal. So long as he doesn't know that we have learned how to cross over between worlds, then he will continue to believe that we are in the dark and pose no threat to him here." Walking through the forest, the group came across a 40-yard web with a 10-foot-long spider at the center. The spider was black, with red markings in the shape of a human skull on the back of its abdomen. If it was nighttime, they might have walked right into the web. Even in the daytime, the fog made it difficult to spot the gigantic spider web. They carefully walked around the perilous trap and moved on. Annabelle's family lived nearby in the small village of Bats Grove. Agents Castabello, Marsh, Stryker, and Che would stay behind near the edge of the woods, while Annabelle would go to the village alone. The homes of Bats Grove were quaint and looked as though they came out of a fairy tale. This world, however, was no happy fairy tale. It was a realm of living nightmares. About 30 minutes after Annabelle had gone to meet her mother and sister, screams were heard. Voices crying out in pain arose from the village. Alerted by the screeching, the agents looked on. Several vampires were terrorizing some of the villagers of Bats Grove. 2 male vampires restrained 2 green-skinned men. The third vampire, a female with red hair, assaulted a mother and daughter. She toyed with them as a cat toys with a pair of mice. The agents began to move forward until Castabello assertively but silently signaled them to stop and remain still. Castabello was fighting off the burning desire to intervene and stop this disgusting assault. Every fiber of his being burned with a fire that could only be put out by justice. He felt as though he was being eaten alive from the inside as his conscience, emotions, and reason waged war with each other. He knew that intervening would jeopardize not only their mission, but possibly the fate of Earth. They were under strict orders to watch and remain out of sight. They were not supposed to engage anyone unless they were attacked. With eyes ablaze, Agent Marsh looked at Agent Castabello with an expression of anger, sorrow, and powerlessness. The screams ceased. The female vampire had fed upon and drained the life out of the mother and daughter. The two male vampires had fed upon and killed the two men. The green-skinned, lifeless bodies of a father, an uncle, a mother, and a daughter littered the dirt road in front of the village. The vile vampires laughed and then flew away. Agent Castabello fell to his knees and grasped his head with his hands. An hour after the atrocious murders, Annabelle emerged through the glimmering fog with her mother and sister. Annabelle's mother was very pretty. She had a mixture of blonde and white hair. Her eyes squinted as the skin on her face tightened. Annabelle's sister followed closely behind their mother. She was a brunette whose features looked similar to her older sister, although shorter in stature. Once they all met up at the forest's edge, they immediately went deeper into the woods. There was no time for introductions. They had to get out of there without drawing attention. Now that it was nighttime, the risk of encountering a vampire, a ghoul, a skeleton soldier, or a wicked witch had greatly increased. The realm of Nok Drakun was filled with dangers. The nighttime sky held a large orange moon. It provided enough light for them to travel without using night vision goggles. The infrared goggles weren't a technology that was known of in this alien world. If anyone saw them wearing them, they would stand out and questions would arise. Raising his right arm, with the palm of his hand open, Castabello said, "Hold up. Did you hear that? I think we're being followed." Agent Stryker replied, "Yeah, I heard someone or something rustling in the distance. I hope it's just a harmless animal." A loud roar broke the silence. Agent Che went crashing into a massive tree. A warlock had cast a spell and conjured a powerful but focused wind and directed it at Agent Che. The agents spread out and took cover behind the huge trees. Annabelle, along with her mother and sister, joined hands and stepped forward and said, "You are outnumbered." Stepping closer, the warlock, dressed in a black and red hooded robe, answered, "Maybe so, but you are outpowered." Two large green-skinned trolls roared as they emerged from the fog. Each troll stood over 8 feet tall. The hulking beasts rushed towards the witches. As the witches began to say a spell against the trolls, they were blasted backward by the warlock. Agents Castabello, Marsh, and Stryker charged the trolls with the staffs that Annabelle had given them. They couldn't use guns because doing so would give away their true origins. One troll clobbered Agent Stryker before he could even get a hit in. The powerful blow from the troll sent him flying through the air. Agent Marsh looked at Castabello and said, "Follow me!" Castabello followed Marsh as she ran through the forest. The two trolls rampaged after them. The warlock watched on, laughed, and bellowed, "Cowards! You're no match for me!" The trolls knocked over small trees and bushes as they charged after Castabello and Marsh. Loud thuds rang out each time the feet of the trolls hit the ground. It sounded like dinosaurs were crashing through the woods. What chance did the agents stand if they couldn't use firearms, and if Castabello couldn't use his Kai-Bo powers? Certainly they would need a more powerful weapon than a wooden walking staff. These trolls were enormous. Faster and faster, Marsh and Castabello ran. It seemed to be of no use. The trolls were only a step or two behind them. The trolls were about to rip them apart limb from limb, when suddenly Marsh cut to her left and said, "Dive to your left, now!" The trolls were suddenly stuck in place. They had run right into a massive spider web. The gargantuan spider descended and bit the first troll. Then it bit the second troll. Each bite delivered a large and lethal dose of poison. The trolls were dead within minutes. The black spider with the red mark of a human skull on its abdomen then wrapped the trolls up so it could feed on them at its leisure. Annabelle and her family had risen to their feet and set their focus on the warlock. With their hands joined, they cast a spell that entombed the warlock in ice. The witches then said another spell, which shattered the warlock into thousands of tiny pieces. On this particular day, the Moon Mist team was fortunate. Agents Stryker and Shay had only been knocked unconscious. They hadn't used any technology from Earth, and Castabello hadn't used his Kaibo powers. Not only did they survive and kill the warlock and his trolls, but they did so without drawing the attention of the Dark Emperor. The first mission to the Dark Realm of Nok Drakun had been a success. At last, they had learned how to gain access to the mystical portal to another world. Additionally, the adventure had permitted them to map out some of the strange new world and to retrieve Annabelle's family. No longer would they be forced to always fight defensively. It was now possible for them to carefully plan on returning to what they dubbed the Halloween dimension. Soon, they could take the fight to the dark powers that threaten humanity. Haunted Possessions. The Sinister Scarecrow. Chilling tales and scary stories. Written and performed by Tony Capobianco. It happened again. Yet another dead body was found in the cornfields. Seemingly without fail, at least one dead body turns up on the land of the old farm every autumn. Junction Ridge used to have a lot of farms, but now only a few remain. One particular farm stands out. No matter what the name of the current owner may be, everyone simply calls it the Old Grasslow Farm. A lot of local folks believe that the Old Grasslow farmhouse, along with its land, are cursed. While calling a place cursed may seem superstitious and outdated in the 21st century, the facts do tell a strange story. For instance, the Junction Herald Tribune recently reported a grotesque discovery on the Old Grasslow farm. The current owner of the farm, Mr. Eric Kirby, was out working in the cornfield when he saw it. The bloody, lifeless corpse of a young man laid in his cornfield. The body had been badly mauled. Lacerations covered the cold, pale flesh. Red blood spatter covered the yellow cornstalks. The scene was horrific. The Junction Ridge Police Department, with the help of forensics, determined that a scythe had been used to kill the young victim. A police officer recovered the weapon. The blood-stained scythe had been found in the hands of a scarecrow that stood overlooking the cornfield. The scarecrow was dressed in a black robe with a black conical crowned hat on the top of its pumpkin head. The pumpkin had been carved with sharp but wide eyes and a fiercely menacing mouth. This creepy scarecrow was attached to a pole. It stood an intimidating 13 feet above the ground. The police took Mr. Eric Kirby down to the police station for questioning. He was, of course, the first and obvious suspect. Both the victim and the murder weapon had been found in his field. In addition to those potentially incriminating facts, an incident had occurred in those fields the night of the murder. 5 kids, ranging from 17 to 19 years old, had partied in the old Graslow fields the night of the killing. The murder victim, Eddie, was part of the partying group. The kids had gone to the cornfield to drink some alcohol and smoke some herb. In a small town in the Hudson Valley, there isn't much to do, and there are few places to do the things that kids want to do. So, partying in a place like a quiet and isolated cornfield can become pretty routine. 3 guys and 2 girls, named Katie and Amy, had been having a good country time when they began to hear some noises. They had heard the sound of someone, or some animal, moving through the corn. They weren't alone. Inebriated as they had been, their reaction time wasn't exactly the greatest. One of the girls, Katie, thought that she had seen a dark silhouette with a pumpkin for a head moving in the corn. Frightened as she was, she dismissed what she had seen and chalked it up to what they had smoked. "Hey, you no good little SOBs! This is private property! Get out of my field! This corn isn't harvestable, and it's because you keep coming out here doing God knows what, and you damage my crops!" Mr. Kirby yelled as he ran towards them. Eddie replied, "Hey, old man, want to join us? We know that you're an alcoholic, and that you like to hit your stepdaughter. Why don't you come and try that crap with me, huh?" Mr. Kirby, who had been drinking, ran towards them with a scythe in his hands and screamed, "I'm going to kill you! You're dead!" Eddie and his 4 friends ran out of that field as fast as they could as they yelled, "You're crazy, you sick drunk!" Having questioned the 4 surviving friends, the police had more than an abundance of evidence to arrest Eric Kirby on suspicion of murder. They also learned that Eric Kirby was an alcoholic with a nasty temper. He had violently raised his hand to his stepdaughter, Amy, on a number of occasions. Eric Kirby had motive and opportunity to kill Eddie. This case seemed to be clear-cut. Amy cried in her room. Eddie had been one of the few people that had treated her well. Ever since Amy, her mom, and her stepdad moved to Junction Ridge that summer, she had a hard time fitting in. Being a 16-year-old girl was difficult enough, but being a 16-year-old girl that moved to a small town makes everything harder. At school, the cool kids bullied and made fun of her. The popular girls laughed at her and mocked her because her parents were farmers, and because she dressed in goth clothing. They called her a spooky freak and a ghoulish goth chick because she was a horror fan. One of the hidden but real reasons that the popular kids emotionally bullied her was because they were intimidated by her. She was smart and beautiful. Therefore, they saw her as a threat to the hierarchy of their social status. Amy knew that things would go from bad to worse at school now. Not only was her friend murdered, but her wretched stepfather had been arrested for the murder. She foresaw that the cool kids would now call her the spooky kid of a drunk and deranged killer. As much as the prospect of even worse bullying troubled her, it was the tragic loss of Eddie that filled her with a seemingly bottomless sorrow. If the physical abuse by her wicked stepfather, the murder of Eddie, and being bullied for being different wasn't enough, then the strange things she had experienced on the farm certainly were. On a number of occasions, Amy had seen strange things. Sometimes she directly saw strange things, and other times she saw shadowy things from the corner of her eye. At the center of all her unsettling experiences was the Scarecrow. The creepy Scarecrow unnerved her to the marrow of her bones. In July, shortly after they moved to the farm, Amy noticed that the Scarecrow would inexplicably be in different positions. One time, as she headed to the barn, she saw that the Scarecrow had its right hand raised as its pumpkin head faced straight ahead toward the house. Then, as she returned from the barn, which was on the left side of the house, she noticed that the pumpkin head had turned towards the barn. It had been looking directly at her. Even though it was a sweltering hot and humid summer day, an ice-cold chill traveled down her spine. She felt an unnatural presence. Then there was the time that she had been working in the flower garden, and she heard someone running in the field. Startled, she swirled her head to the sound of someone running through the field. As she turned her head, she froze, not on account of what she saw, but on what she didn't see. The scarecrow was not in its normal place on the pole in the front of the house. It was nowhere to be seen. One night, Amy was doing dishes at the kitchen sink. She had been in a good mood that day, because she had gotten back from her friend Katie's house. They had watched The Lost Boys. It was one of their favorite vampire movies. Watching her favorite horror movies always comforted Amy. They were an escape from the troubles of the real world. Horror films were a place where the outcast often beat the big bad monster. In these films, people like herself weren't the losers. No, they were the survivors. More than that, they were the heroes. The other reason that horror movies felt like home to her was because she used to watch them together with her biological father. Those were the wonderful days in the time before he died of cancer. Those days felt like a lifetime ago. While washing the dishes in the kitchen sink, Amy's heart felt warm and filled with love. That's when she saw two yellowish red eyes staring at her through the window. In the darkness beyond the glass window stood the dreadful scarecrow. Its pumpkin head looked right at her. It was only 3 feet away from the window. Amy dropped the glass cup that she had been washing, and the glass shattered. Her sense of love and peace had shattered along with the broken glass. A fearful dread washed over her. The noise of the accident brought her stepfather into the kitchen, and he slapped her right across her face. Her nose bled. The scarecrow watched it all. Amy thought that she must have been going mad. Her late grandmother on her mother's side had suffered from schizophrenia. Amy had feared that she too might one day slip into the land of mental illness. What she was seeing with the scarecrow made her think that the gene that can cause mental illness might have been triggered in her. She had read that schizophrenia often comes on between the teenage years and your early 30s. She was 16, so maybe it was beginning. Going to see a psychiatrist might have been Amy's next step had she not spoken to Katie after the murder of Eddie. With tears in her eyes, Katie lit a cigarette and began to talk. "Amy, I know this is going to sound crazy, but I have to tell you something. Please don't laugh, okay?" said Katie as she put the cigarette to her lips and inhaled deeply. "Katie, I promise I won't laugh. You can tell me anything, anything at all. I'm here for you. You're about the only friend that I have left here," gently replied Amy. "Okay, I saw something the night that Eddie was murdered. It's an impossible image that I haven't been able to get out of my head. I just feel something deep inside of me, and it's telling me to tell you what I saw. Before your psycho stepfather came out and chased us with a fracking weapon, I saw something with a pumpkin for a head moving through the field," explained Katie as the cigarette shook in her trembling hand. With her eyes wide, Amy took out a pack of cigarettes from her purse and quickly took out a cigarette from the pack. With her hands now trembling, she lit a cigarette and inhaled deeply. As she exhaled, she began to tell Katie all about her experiences with the creepy scarecrow and how she sincerely believed she was going mad. Amy added that she too had seen the menacing scarecrow that night. The two friends, although terribly frightened, felt comfort in confessing to each other what they had experienced. Something unexplainable was afoot, but at least they weren't dealing with this alone. They had each other. At times like that, having someone to lean on means everything. Evil wants to isolate you. Like a predator, it cunningly works to separate its prey from the herd. In the case of humans, our family and friends are our herd. Like a lion or wolf, once the prey has been separated, the vicious attack commences. In order to make sure that a deranged person hadn't been impersonating a scarecrow, Amy and Katie inspected the sinister scarecrow. They confirmed what their intuition had suggested. The scarecrow was no man. It was made of straw, and its head was a carved pumpkin. There was no way for someone to put that pumpkin on their head as a mask. The bottom of the pumpkin was intact. There was no place to slide your head into the bottom. The girls agreed that this had been the exact pumpkin head that they had seen attached to this scarecrow as it stalked around the fields. While both Amy and Katie had an extensive knowledge of horror movies and folklore about monsters, they weren't aware of any significant lore about paranormal scarecrows. They decided that a visit to the town historian was to be their next step. Old man Mr. Fox was the town historian of Junction Ridge. He was well acquainted with the folklore of the Hudson Valley. The two girls drove to Mr. Fox's house. A cold September rain began to fall. Cold and wet, they knocked on the door. The kindly Mr. Ted Fox opened the door. The girls explained that they were interested in learning more about the history of Amy's property. Mr. Fox answered, "Come on in, ladies. It's miserable out there. Come inside before you catch a cold." Amy responded, "Thanks so much, Mr. Fox." As the girls took off their raincoats and hung them by the door, Mr. Fox said, "I'm so sorry for the loss of your dear friend Eddie. What a terrible tragedy. You're going through a lot. If there's anything I can do to help, you girls just let me know." "Thanks, Mr. Fox. As a matter of fact, there is something that we were hoping that you could help us with," Amy answered as she and Katie sat down on the couch in the living room. "Ah, yes. Yes. You would like to know more about the history of your house," said Mr. Fox softly. "Yes, please. That would be very much appreciated," said Amy as she pushed her silky black hair away from her eyes. Mr. Fox folded his arms across his chest as he began to tell them the history of Amy's farmhouse. Well, the old Graslow farmhouse was built in 1813. For its first 125 years of existence, many farms sprawled across the lands of the Hudson Valley. Junction Ridge was primarily a farmer's town until demographics really changed in the 1960s. Farmers live and die by the weather. Some years are better than others. Droughts and bad weather are part of the reality of farming, but one year was particularly bad. In 1866, a severe drought and a scorching sun decimated crops all across the Hudson Valley of New York. Katie sighed as she had grown a bit impatient and said, "Excuse me, Mr. Fox. I appreciate the history lesson, but how relevant is a drought from over a century? How relevant is the weather to a supposed curse? That's what you want to know, isn't it?" Mr. Fox interjected before Katie could finish her sentence. Yes, actually," replied Katie as her big brown eyes grew wide. "Don't be surprised. Given the recent murder at the old Graslow farm, it doesn't take the deduction of Columbo to guess why you're here," said Mr. Fox as he straightened his glasses near his nose. "Oh, right. I suppose it was pretty obvious. Please continue," said Katie as she smiled slightly. Old man Mr. Fox continued. "So the drought was really, really bad in 1863. Some farmers lost everything and sold their farms for what they could. Almost all of the farmers did the best that they could, but chalked up the hardships as an act of God that was out of their control. Now, I said almost all of the farmers reacted with these sentiments, but not all of the farmers surrendered to this fate. Reginald Graslow refused to accept that events were out of his control. He wasn't going to let his livelihood and his property slip away from him. So, it's said that he took matters into his own hands. It's important to note that the practice of Spiritism and the occult skyrocketed during and after the Civil War. The inconceivable number of deaths impacted the psyche of the American people, and many of them opened what Christian society would have called forbidden doors. What forbidden doors did they open? What exactly did Reginald Graslow do? Amy asked as she sat up straight as a level. In a somber and serious tone, Mr. Fox replied, "Stories that have been passed down through the generations speak of the unspeakable. It is said that Reginald Graslow was skilled in dark magical arts. He was a practitioner of the old ways. On October 31st of 1863, Reginald performed a dark ceremony. He offered his 13-year-old son Wesley as a sacrifice to Demeter. To the ancient Greeks, Demeter was the goddess of agriculture. The innocent virgin blood of his own son had been spilled. Ever since that horrific night, records of strange deaths on the old Graslow farm have persisted through the years. There are a number of reports of a sinister scarecrow that stalks the fields. Just as sure as the arrival of the fall season, every autumn sees at least one person die on the old Graslow land. The lore says that the human sacrifice opened a door to a dark presence. The opening of this forbidden door acted as an invitation for a malevolent spirit to possess the Graslow property. Some believe that the possession is more specific. If there is truth to this, I happen to be of the opinion that it is not the land itself that's cursed. No, it's the infernal scarecrow that's cursed. It's diabolically possessed." The pretty faces of the two young women grew pale as Mr. Fox concluded his tale. Amy responded, "Wow. We have both seen the sinister scarecrow move and skulk around. I wasn't going to mention it to you because I know how crazy it sounds. In fact, until today I thought that I was losing my mind. So, let's say this was real. Is there a way to end the curse? Is there a way to kill the sinister scarecrow and close the forbidden door?" Rubbing his white bearded chin, Mr. Fox thoughtfully said, "Those are great questions, young lady. Hypothetically, one could perform a cleansing ritual and exorcise the malevolent entity from the scarecrow. Then one would burn it, banish it, and send it back to its dark realm while closing the opened portal. This would help the person to reclaim and take ownership of everything on their rightful property." "Do you happen to have the spells or literature that gives detailed instructions to perform such a cleansing ritual?" asked Amy as her hazel eyes narrowed. "Why, yes, dear. I do have the manuscripts. However, it's too dangerous. I can't let you attempt this by yourself. Evil doesn't want to be forced out. It wants to keep acting upon whatever it's been given rights to. Malevolent, inhuman spirits or demons will not quietly allow you to try to reclaim your rights over an object or a place. The history shows that this particular spirit is not only capable of killing, but that it does so again and again each year. It won't hesitate in attempting to kill you or anyone else that gets in its wicked way," Mr. Fox answered with a concerned look. "Okay, I understand that, and I appreciate your concern, Mr. Fox. I really do. But the thing is, I live in the old Graslow farmhouse. The evil scarecrow has been watching and stalking me. It already killed Eddie. Eddie was a sweet kid. He was my friend. If we don't do something, the killings will continue. If there is something that we can do, and we refuse to do it because we're afraid, then any future blood that's spilled by the scarecrow will be on our hands," Amy responded in a determined voice. "Yes, child. You are right. At 73, I'm not a young man anymore, but I will help you. I'll come with you, and I'll help you to perform the cleansing ceremony. We will burn that rotten scarecrow. We will put an end to this vile spiritual plague," said Mr. Fox with more conviction. So it was that Mr. Fox, Katy, Amy, and their friends Brian and Sam prepared for battle. Brian and Sam were with the girls partying in the field the fateful night that Eddie had been murdered. Eddie had returned to the Graslow farm that night to play a prank on Amy's stepfather. He had wanted to get some payback for the insane threats made by Amy's stepfather. Unfortunately, that decision cost Eddie his life, because when he returned to the field, he was shredded to pieces by the evil killer Scarecrow. Late at night on All Hallows' Eve, the team went to Amy's house to put an end to the evil. They sought justice and closure. The old manuscript called for the ceremony to begin at the witching hour. It was to be completed as night became dawn on All Saints' Day, November 1st. It was a brisk, chilly autumn night. Rain from earlier in the evening had caused fog to develop and be trapped in the Hudson Valley. The light of the moon gave the fog an eerie glow. Nature seemed to have set the spooky atmosphere to match the ominous feeling felt by all. Things did not start according to plan. As the team arrived to the post where the cursed scarecrow usually stood, they saw that it wasn't there. Their hearts began to beat more rapidly. The release of adrenaline heightened their senses. They were so alert that even the sighting of a cat prowling the night startled them. They were on edge, and with good reason. Mr. Fox began setting up an altar on a tree stump. As he did so, Amy, Katy, and Sam sprinkled holy water around the property. Brian investigated a sound that he had heard in the field. He was carrying a machete. The light of his flashlight did not provide much help because a denser fog seemed to be rolling in. The sound of the corn being slapped as though something was moving through it caused Brian's stomach to relocate to his chest. Fear settled in. Ready to strike, he raised his machete. Suddenly, the demonic scarecrow appeared in front of him. Its yellowish-red eyes glowed through its pumpkin head. Brian hacked the monstrosity's right arm off. The severed arm made of straw fell to the ground. After a brief moment, the severed arm launched from the ground and flew to Brian's neck. In disbelief, Brian gasped for air, but it was no use. The cursed arm made of straw choked the life out of him. With eyes burning, the scarecrow looked on from only several feet away. Lifeless, Brian's body dropped to the ground. Amy, Katy, and Sam were concerned that they didn't know where Brian was. They began to search for him when Mr. Fox told them, "No, do not go looking for him. The sinister scarecrow wants to isolate us. Entering into that field in this fog will make that an easy task for him. We must remain here. We must stay together. We won't be able to kill this vile thing with ordinary weapons. We need to do the ritual. We need to follow the plan. Only when we get started and bless our weapons will they offer us any meaningful protection. Now, Amy, this is your home, and you have to be the celebrant of these sacred cleansing rites." Amy approached the altar. Enshrouded by the gloomy but slightly illuminated fog, she began to read the words of the ritual. As she did so, an unnatural and loud shriek was heard in the cornfield. The shriek was followed by the sound of something violently running through the field. The start of the ritual had not gone unnoticed. The scarecrow grew furious. A glowing light began to encircle Amy, Katy, Sam, and Mr. Fox. Moments later, the wicked scarecrow came running out of the cornfield and towards the group. The scarecrow had picked up the machete that Brian had dropped as his dead body had fallen to the cold ground. The insidious monster raised the machete in its right hand. The very arm that Brian had severed had reattached itself to the hideous figure. The unholy straw man charged toward them, but it was propelled backwards. The glowing light surrounding this brave team had formed a protective barrier around them. The Scarecrow furiously thrust the blade against the magical force field. Again and again the Scarecrow slashed and hacked at the luminous perimeter, and again his attempts were thwarted. The ritual required hours of time, and the Scarecrow incessantly tried to break through the ring of protection the entire time. It shrieked a blood-curdling shriek again and again. It raged to and fro again and again. It tried to intimidate them. It tried to gain power over them by instilling and filling them with fear. These attempts proved to be futile. The brave team stayed united together. Amy refused to break her concentration. She could not look beyond the necessary task at hand. Minutes before the break of dawn, Amy recited the words, "I reject and denounce evil. The past evil committed by others will not bind me. I am free. Evil is not welcome here. I bind the evil that was summoned here, so that it will do no further harm. The evil is bound, and it shall burn as the sun rises this morning. The light has revealed the evil. No longer can it hide in darkness. I take authority of my land. Light scatters the darkness. Let the light of the sun shine, and destroy this unwelcome, vile spirit." The recitation of those words changed everything. Suddenly the Scarecrow, apparently compelled by an unseen force, flew up off of the ground and onto its pole. As it was invisibly bound to the pole, it shrieked. Only this time, the shriek sounded to be caused by pain rather than a pure anger. Then, as the sun rose, the sinister Scarecrow burst into flames. The Scarecrow was never seen again. Amy's stepfather went to prison for the murder of Eddie. The evidence was overwhelming, and arguing that a cursed Scarecrow was the killer was not something that would hold up in court. Although Amy's stepfather was innocent in this case, he had in fact killed an ex-girlfriend of his years ago. No one had been able to prove it, but he was guilty. Seems like karma got to him. A lifetime sentence in prison ensured that he would never beat Amy again. With the help of Old Man Mr. Fox and her friends, Amy reclaimed her life. No longer does she walk in fear and darkness. The light shines her path. Trick or Treat, Stalked on Halloween. Written and performed by Tony Capobianco. Halloween was always very special to me. Along with Christmas, Halloween was a day in which anything seemed possible. It was a day when the extraordinary became ordinary. Even the dull monotony of going to school was transformed into something fun and exciting. Classrooms and hallways were eerily decorated with paper decorations of witches, black cats, pumpkins, skeletons, and ghosts. You, along with all of your friends and classmates, were dressed up in costumes that you wouldn't have been permitted to wear on any other day. Amazingly, in the spirit of Halloween, many of the teachers dressed up in costumes too. Candy was shared in classrooms, and a spooky school Halloween parade was held. It was truly magical. As fantastical as Halloween always was, one particular Halloween was the most fantastical of all. The year was 1991. I was 12 years old and in the 7th grade at the time. October 31st fell on a Thursday that fateful year. A cold rain in the morning had departed and left behind a ghostly fog which had enveloped the entire Hudson Valley. The spectral mist surrounded the fantastic fall foliage. The leaves, with their various shades of orange and red, seemed to have shined through the fog as though they radiated a soft light. Simply put, the landscape looked as though a spooky cartoon depiction of Halloween had sprung to life. My parents had said that I could take my little sister, Haley, out trick-or-treating around the neighborhood. Pedro, my best friend, came along with us. It was the first time that we had gone trick-or-treating without our parents. The taste of independence, or so we thought, would surely make the candy more delicious. I chose to be a vampire for Halloween. My dad, who was dressed as an undead ghoul, had put on my makeup for me. Dad and I loved horror movies, and we particularly loved vampire movies. Fright Night, The Lost Boys, and Salem's Lot were our favorite vampire flicks. He did a terrific job of making me look like the vampire from Nosferatu. With Dad's help, I looked delightfully dreadful. Haley had chosen to be a witch for Halloween. Mom had gotten her a costume from the store, and she applied her green makeup for her. Haley wore the classical black conical witch's hat along with a black dress. She carried a plastic orange pumpkin to put all of her treats in. She was so excited that day. She almost loved Halloween as much as I did. The elementary school's Halloween parade earlier that day had really lit the fire of Haley's anticipation. She had won Best Halloween Short Story in her 4th grade class. The Grim Reaper is what Pedro had chosen to be for that Halloween. He was dressed in a homemade black robe with a hood. Pedro's mother had lovingly sewed his costume for him. The details of his robe were far superior to anything available in the store. The macabre robe even had a skull and crossbones on the chest. The backside was adorned with a half moon and the words, "Fear the Reaper." Sunset was at 5:53 p.m. Pedro, Haley, and I left my house to go trick-or-treating at 5:30. We wanted to be out walking the neighborhood as the sun set. Dusk was the perfect time to begin our Halloween adventure. There's something magical about being outside as day transforms to night. That sense of something magical is only increased on Halloween. On Halloween, we got the chance to be the monsters. If we were the monsters, then we had nothing to fear. Or at least, in our innocence, that's what we had thought. The eerie fog covered the streets of Junction Ridge. As the sun went down, the fog began to take an unsettling and unnatural appearance. Our neighborhood in Junction Ridge had always gotten into the Halloween spirit. Most of the houses put up Halloween decorations in their front yards. The orange Halloween lights from these home haunts had given the fog an unearthly glow. The fog, the orange lights, and the life-sized monster props created an ominous atmosphere. Each person's yard was like a scary scene from another world. Similarly, each door that opened after you knocked on it was a glimpse into the home and lives of the people who lived there. How amazing it was to wonder what their lives were like. The imagination ran wild as you considered what similarities and differences might exist between their families and yours. Today's trunk-or-treating can't compete with good old-fashioned trick-or-treating. The truly bizarre events of that night began shortly after sunset. It started as the three of us had heard a distant voice calling out, "Hey, hey, Haley." This ghostly call haunted us for the remainder of our time trick-or-treating. The voice calling out my sister's name seemed to come about every 20 minutes or so. It wasn't a voice that we recognized, and it seemed otherworldly in some way. It was like hearing a broken up or a faded voice on a long-distance call. If that wasn't creepy enough, we heard a wolf howling in the distance. It made us very unnerved. We became more unnerved as we became aware that a man was following us. The man was tall and thin, seemingly unnaturally thin. He wore a red robe with a red hood. His creepy outfit was accentuated by his realistic skeleton mask. To make light of the potential threat that we perceived he might pose, we nicknamed him Old Thinny. He was accompanied by what appeared to be a wolf. I knew that it couldn't have been a wolf, so I assumed that it must have been a husky. At around 6:30 p.m. we had lost sight of him. As I stood still, I turned my head around like it was on a swivel to see if I could locate Old Thinny. I was pushed to the ground by Gary Bormat. Gary was the school bully. He mercilessly bullied Pedro and I. He also hadn't been the sharpest tack in the box. He was only in 7th grade with us because he failed 7th grade the previous year. "What's your problem? Why don't you leave us alone?" asked Pedro as he extended his hand to help me up from the ground. "You want to know what my problem is? I'll tell you. My problem is that you and your friend Johnny are dorks. I hate dorks, and I hate you," replied Gary coldly. "Hey, Gary, just leave us alone," I said. "Aw, baby Johnny wants us to leave him alone," Gary said in a whiny voice as his two overgrown cohorts emerged from the fog. Gary's friend Jack handed him a baseball bat. With a sick smile on his face, Gary took the steel baseball bat, ran towards a nearby jack-o'-lantern on someone's yard display, and he struck it with the bat. The jack-o'-lantern was shattered. Gary's other barbarian of a friend, Simon, laughed like a madman. The bullies weren't dressed up for Halloween. They wore their ordinary, everyday clothes. "Leave us alone, you jerks! If you don't leave us alone, my big brother is going to make you regret it," Haley threatened. "Your brother Johnny is a loser. All three of you are pathetic losers. Johnny is even more of a little girl than you are, you ugly little brat," said Gary as he stepped closer. "Yeah, Johnny and Pedro are real girly men. Only girly men dress up for Halloween," sneered Jack and Simon. Fearless, Haley slapped Gary across his acne-covered face. Gary's brutish face became blood red as he pushed Haley to the ground. He was about to get on top of her, but I tackled him to the ground and punched him right in his face. Blood began to flow from his nose. White-hot adrenaline had flooded my body, and I had acted on pure instinct and rage. Before I could hit Gary a second time, 4 hands pulled me off of him. Gary's cohorts, Jack and Simon, had stepped in to save Gary from being humiliated further. As Jack restrained me, Simon punched me in the gut. Pedro came to my aid and punched Simon's jaw. Gary had retrieved the bat and blindsided Pedro by swinging away at his back. Pedro went crashing down to the ground face first. Swinging the bat wildly through the air, Gary walked toward me. He had become unhinged as he threatened. "You're dead! You're all dead! I'm going to kill you all!" Suddenly, Jack screamed in terror. Each of us turned to see that he was being dragged backward into the fog. A red-robed figure was effortlessly dragging Jack away. The fog obscured what happened next. Jack's screams grew more distant, and then they ceased. Each of us stopped dead in our tracks. The silence was deafening. Before we could process what was happening, the silhouette of a tall and extremely thin figure in a hooded red robe slowly approached us. As the figure came closer, I saw that it wore a lifelike skeleton mask. It was Old Thinny. Gary, with baseball bat in hand, began to walk towards Old Thinny. Simon, always the mindless follower, followed. Frozen by wonder and fear, Pedro, Haley, and I looked on. As Old Thinny drew closer, it became clear that his feet weren't touching the ground. His feet were about 6 inches above the ground. He was floating. In fact, he was floating directly towards our attackers. Gary stopped. He must have seen that this mysterious red-hooded figure was floating toward him. Old Thinny continued to slowly and menacingly float toward the remaining bullies. Gary yelled, "I don't know what you are, but you're gonna pay for this!" Old Thinny responded, "You're right about one thing. You don't know what I am. Your puny mind can't even imagine who and what I am. But you're wrong about the other thing. It's you who's going to pay." "Whatever, bonehead. We're not afraid of you," replied Gary as if he was trying to convince himself. "You should be. Indeed, you should be very afraid of me," said Old Thinny as he raised his right arm and pointed at Gary. In doing so, it was revealed that the hooded figure wasn't wearing a costume. He was truly a skeleton. Simon's face grew paler than a ghost. He turned and ran away. Right before our very eyes, Old Thinny had morphed into a horrific, demonic-looking clown. He took out a chain and lassoed Simon. The grotesque clown reeled Simon in like a fish. The sound of the rattling chain whipping through the air added to the already sky-high levels of fear. After the ferocious clown pulled Simon in, it grasped him with its claw-like hands. Then it pulled its head back and opened its mouth until it was 2 feet wide. A light began to leave from Simon's mouth, and it entered into the grotesque clown's mouth. This must have continued over several minutes. When the transfer of light or energy was complete, Simon's lifeless body dropped to the floor like a sack of potatoes. His skin had turned white as snow, and his body had shriveled. Haley cried. Mouths agape, Pedro and I watched the gruesome scene as though we had been frozen in time. It had been the sound of Haley's crying that snapped me out of the trance-like state. I shook Pedro, grappled Haley's delicate little hand, and yelled, "Run!" The 3 of us ran like the wind. As we were running, we noticed that Old Thinny was never out of sight. He wasn't moving, and yet, no matter how fast or how far we ran, we didn't create any distance between us and that monster. It was as though the fog truly was otherworldly. The orange-tinted, glowing fog had acted as a magical barrier. After 5 minutes of sprinting around, we fell to our knees. I saw Gary repeatedly strike the clown-like creature with his bat, but it had no effect. After his arms grew tired, he dropped the baseball bat. Exhausted, he said, "Who are you, and what do you want with me?" The hideous clown stared at Gary and answered, "I have numerous names. I am Fear. I am Dread. I am the Bringer of Death. I am the Swallower of Souls. I am Halloween. As to what I want with you, it's the same as I wanted from your moronic cohorts. Respect and fear is what I desire. Each Halloween I move over the earth searching for disrespectful fools such as yourself. You and your disrespectful friends do not have the Halloween spirit. You did not honor this most magnificent and special day. Not only did you not wear a costume or decorate your homes, but you had the audacity to mock those who did honor the Halloween spirit. The penalty for your crimes is death. Not only will I kill you, but I'll swallow your soul too. Your soul will belong to me, and I'll take you to my world where you'll eternally be my slave. Oh, and one more thing. I have a special surprise for you. I know how much you like werewolves. As the ghoulish figure completed those words, he transformed into a great, big, and ferocious werewolf. The clothes that the clown had been wearing tore apart, and hair grew out of its skin. The body remained similar to the shape of a man, but its head got longer and became wolf-like. The snout was long. Its eyes were glowing yellow, and its teeth were large and sharp. It was as if the teeth of a T-Rex had replaced the smaller teeth of the clown-like figure. Gary peed in his pants as his body shook all over. The werewolf lunged at Gary, grabbed him by his throat with his right hand, and lifted him several feet off of the ground. The werewolf unhinged its jaws, and the light of Gary's soul began draining into the creature's mouth. The creature sucked in the light until the light was gone. After it had finished feeding, it dropped Gary's corpse to the ground like it was garbage. The disturbing creature then returned to the frightful shape of a skeleton wearing a red hooded robe. It once again looked like Old Thinny. He levitated about half of a foot off of the ground and began floating toward us. As he hovered closer, closer, ever closer, he hummed a song that you might expect the organ to be playing in Dracula's castle. We tried to run, but it was of no use. The mystical fog had mysteriously imprisoned us. My blood had already run cold. Each moment felt like an eternity had passed. I felt powerless to protect my sister or my friend. Fear consumed my being. Just when I thought that it was impossible to be more afraid, the fear increased even more. This fiendish ghoul, Old Thinny, came within a yard of us. He looked right at me and said, "Boy, do I have a Halloween treat for you." Old Thinny then morphed into a vampire. He looked like the classical version of the vampire in Nosferatu. Grayish flesh grew over his bones. He had 2 red glowing eyes. His fingers and fingernails were long. 2 sharp, pointy fangs protruded from his mouth over his lips. It was absolutely terrifying. The ghastly thing then looked at me with its glowing red eyes and said, "This one's for you, kid. I know that vampires are your favorite. Everyone is entitled to a scare on Halloween. I'm quite sure that you'll never forget this splendid night, nor will you ever watch a vampire film the same way again. This is my dark gift to you." Simon's greatest fear was a clown, so I assumed the form that would frighten him the most. For Gary, I became a werewolf, because that was his worst nightmare. As a bonus, their souls taste so delicious when they're terrified. Old Thinny then bent down and took Haley's hand. My skin crawled as my stomach churned with crippling anxiety. Old Thinny lifted my sister's soft hand to his lips and he kissed it. After he gently kissed her hand, he said, "Sweet little girl, you have a gift. Your short horror stories are splendidly horrific. We will be watching your writing career with great anticipation." Standing up straight, Old Thinny looked at all 3 of us as he said, "The 3 of you are blessed with a strong Halloween spirit. Very few people respect, enjoy, and honor this most wonderful day as you do. The spirit of spookiness is strong with you. Don't ever change." The 3 of us felt the greatest relief that we had ever felt when we realized that he wasn't going to harm us. Old Thinny then returned to his red hooded skeleton form and floated into the fog. He called for his furry companion. A wolf howled and then came running to his side. The wolf had glowing orange eyes. With his wolf at his side, old Thinny floated away. Just before he disappeared into the ethereal orange-tinted fog, he turned back and said, "Happy Halloween." So it was that we would never forget that Halloween on Thursday in 1991. We were stalked while trick-or-treating, and I believe that the ghoulish stalker saved our lives. If you ever think that you are too old for Halloween, remember old Thinny. If you disrespect or desecrate Halloween, the ghostly spirit of Halloween might just pay you a terrifying visit. The Halloween that you decide to mock or attack those who love the holiday might well be your last. Always remember, just because you don't see them doesn't mean that they aren't there. I hope that you enjoyed your stay here at the Haunted Half Moon Inn. The Master requests that you consider supporting me and the inn by becoming a a patron of mine on Patreon. The Half Moon Inn needs your support to keep the doors open. You wouldn't want the residents here to feel forgotten and abandoned, would you? Creating quality scary stories to share with you is very important to me. Running this inn of horror is a passion of mine, and I would truly appreciate your support. The world is hurting. It needs more horror. Help me to heal the world through horror. Together, with your help, we could haunt this world one home at a time. Until next time, always remember, just because you don't see them doesn't mean that they aren't there.
Thank you.